if we were to attempt to trace Freemasonry back from generation to generation, lodge to lodge for only a few hundred years, we would have a very difficult task. This is what many of you run into. And you don't know how to get over the wall. The mystery hedging about what they call the craft and the long periods of persecution and suppression make the difficulties nearly insurmountable until you learn to stop looking for names in lodges and follow the thread of their belief, teachings, and symbols. And if you're willing to credit Masonry's own legends of its past, which aver to it always have been a guild of sacred and symbolic architects, temple builders, and furnishers, then we leap back over the enormous periods of time which separate us from the earliest historical records of the human race. In our own day, we worship Almighty God under the abstract name of Jehovah, giving the latter no more technical significance than that of an ineffable name representative of the divine power and majesty, simply because somebody told us that that's what we were supposed to do. Can't challenge what you're told, can't challenge what you're presented with. My God, read your own Bible that you say can't be challenged and study the story of Job, who challenged God himself and came out the victor. What is the matter with you people? You see, Freemasonry is what remains of the vast ancient science which derived countless expressions of this sacred word from the geometry of the universe and translated them into the ground plans, elevations, individual stones, symbolic designs, and sacred furniture of all the great temples of antiquity. One of the most curious discoveries of modern times is, contrary to the generally accepted idea that Jehovah has ever been the center of a pure monotheistic religion like that of Israel and unassociated with idolatry or graven images as reprobated by Jewish sacred law. Jehovah worship was originally the secret adoration of the hidden source of life, conceived only by the illuminated priesthoods and their pupils, because discoverable only through a science far above the heads of the sheeple, or the profane, as the people in the mysteries call all of us before we learn to use our brains. So in almost all the ancient culture lands of the Orient, Jehovah reposed, veiled in a gorgeous external imagery symbolic of the forces of nature and material features of our physical universe, which was held out to the profane, that's you, in an elaborate pantheism. Pantheism. If we would fathom the remoteness of the origin of the devotion to a unique deity, we must take into consideration the vast number of evidences extending back into the Neolithic and Bronze Ages of primitive humanity, for these stories, legends, existed long before any written Bible. When the pride of wealth and conquest among the great civilizations of the Near East, Chaldea, Babylonia, and Assyria, were displayed in the palaces, towers, and temples abounding in the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, Jehovah was already older than the eternal hills and set forth in 1,000 symbols which only the priesthood could interpret. The great human-headed, lion-bodied, bull-horned, and hoofed and eagle-winged monsters which stood at the temple gates were symbols of Jehovah and rebuses of his name. And the story of Ezekiel's vision is not a recounting of the landing of a flying saucer, but is his own encounter within himself with this God, Jehovah. You can read the Bible 1,000,000 times if you wish, and you can claim to understand it, and you can spout out your memorization of the verses and your interpretations of what it means all you want to. But until you have studied the Matrian, you've studied the ancient history from which the Bible was written, you will never understand it. Not in 1,000,000 years, not ever. In the region of the Tigris and Euphrates, this region, which has produced almost all of the familiar Old Testament legends, the creation, the first fratricide, the deluge, the Tower of Babel, Samson, and dozens of other symbolic myths which have been found in the cuneiform scratched clay libraries of that distant land and day. There are many evidences that the original legend, which crystallized into the worldwide Masonic epic, and yes, that's exactly what it is, had its first concrete expression on the banks of the Euphrates. And throughout that region are found the first evidences of the cultivation of Masonry or the Brotherhood in a purely symbolic or speculative sense, in the existence of innumerable miniature stone amulets cut in the sacred geometrical dimensions, principal among them being the keystone, discovered during the investigations of the ancient sepulchres of that region. And these little keystones, each of which is pierced for suspension, are made of the same stones as the famous Babylonian cylinder seals, and are cut at a uniform angle of 23 1/2 degrees, that of the inclination of the axis of the earth to the pole of the ecliptic. How could they have known? There are also double keystones of 47 degrees, and both are but miniatures of the conical Bethels reverenced by the primitive Jehovah worshippers in the East. You see, you look back upon these ancient people as some kind of stupid cavemen with a club in one hand and a bladder of wine in the other. And it's not so, ladies and gentlemen. For they knew many things back then that we are just now beginning to rediscover. And I say rediscover because they knew it, and it was lost over the centuries. There's a tradition in Freemasonry within the Brotherhood that the mythical King Nimrod of Babylon was protector or grand master of every trade guild, including that of the architects. But while the light of modern research has failed to locate the existence of that famed monarch, it is a fact that sitting statues of Babylonian governors have been found bearing architects' plans of temples or palaces that they had erected on their knees. One of Gudea, Patesi, or Viceroy of Erech, so posed, is now in the British Museum. And not only are innumerable Masonic symbolisms of our own day discoverable among the remains of these people, but remarkable sculptured scenes which will at once be recognized by anyone who studied the mysteries as correct representations of scenes of ancient initiation. And to those who have been through these initiations or who have studied them as I have, they are very familiar, strangely familiar. And the ridicule